I actually think it came within working for the first 6 months. It was definitely the very first 6 months of working that it started off, and I thought, I don't think I could be an optometrist that is doing what I'm doing now for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And not to say like there's plenty of optometrists that do that thrive in that environment, that love it. And I've had conversations with family members too that have said, I love to be the person that is not the owner. That is where I do thrive. That is where I can do my best. But in those first few months, I realized that I'm not that kind of person. And I do need that extra step and that extra challenge.
Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. In each episode, we bring together leaders from optometry, optical dispensing, and business to share insights, practical strategies, and the latest developments shaping independent practice today. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore how innovation, collaboration, and smart business thinking can drive growth, enhance patient care, and strengthen the future of independent optometry. Whether you're a student, an early career professional, or an established practice owner, The Focused View is your go-to source for knowledge, inspiration, and connection. The Focused View is brought to you by Vision Connection, supporting independent eye care professionals across Australia through collaboration, education, and business growth. By working closely with leading suppliers and industry partners, Vision Connection offers unique opportunities that help independents stand out and succeed. To find out more, visit their website, visionconnection.com.au. In today's episode, we're joined by Alisha Shastri, optometrist, director, and co-owner of iOptical, an independent practice in Greenvale, Victoria. After graduating during COVID in 2020, Alisha began her career in rural South Australia before making the leap into independent practice ownership just a few years later, alongside her business partner, Ebru. We dive into the realities of starting a Greenfield practice from scratch, navigating uncertainty as an optometrist, and the mindset required to take that leap into business ownership. We also discuss location strategy, the challenges of building a practice while working full-time, and the lessons learned through creating a business with a strong community focus from day one. If you're a student, early career optometrist, or someone curious about the future of independent optometry, this episode offers practical insights into what it really takes to start young and build something of your own. So let's dive into this episode. Alisha, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Like I said, really excited to get to know your journey and I guess, learn more about the goals you're kicking down there in Melbourne. But I guess for the context of the audience, if you could please take us back to where it all started. How did optometry start in your mind? And I guess, how did it go from that point to almost where you are now?
Yeah, so let's go way back when I was in school. I always knew I wanted to do something within the health field. And I guess you do all the research of figuring out what courses are available, what's there, what universities are offering everything to, what's the ATAR to get into everything. And optometry just sparked an interest for me. I think I've had a lot of interest in it, but also an experience of going there constantly every couple of years to get an eye checkup and everything. So that's sort of how that sparked my interest. And, lucky for me, got through the course and everything, which I think a lot of students will know. Regardless of whatever university you're at, it is not the easiest course to get through as well. But, most, if not everyone, makes it towards the end, which is always a positive too. And then, just started the career within optometry. It was a very weird time for myself and my cohort because we were the graduates of 2020. So what a weird time to be graduating from uni in a workforce that didn't even know what was going on too. And it wasn't optometry. It was absolutely everywhere around the entire world of saying, what is going on? Because we can't leave our house. Most people couldn't even go to work. You're working from home and everything. So it was a very, very strange time to start work. But I think it sort of started us off on this journey.
Yeah. And I mean, COVID, in the beginning of COVID, it was such uncertainty, and there's enough uncertainty when you finish uni from the outset anyway, let alone throwing in, a complication like COVID. But I guess as uni was starting to draw to a close, what was your mindset at that time? And I guess, how did COVID shape it? And we'll do a bit more of unpacking with regards to what that looked like as well. But just from a top level point of view, what was the mindset like initially?
It was a weird mindset because our mindset was, oh, are we actually going to get a job? Are we actually going to be able to graduate and go to work? Because we were a little bit delayed because, we couldn't be on placement. We couldn't be doing the exams just because everything was shut down. So I think that made it really hard to know the uncertainty of what's actually going to happen with this cohort, with us graduating. Are we going to make it? And then once we did and do make it, where are we all going to be? Because, most people want to get a job maybe close to home and maybe don't want to do too much travel. But we were sort of in that situation where not a lot of us had much of a choice, and we had to sort of take what was available because many, many stores were shut. Not a lot of stores were hiring any optoms because they didn't have any capacity to, because they had to keep their doors closed anyway. So, there's not much point of having a new grad there when your doors aren't even open. So there was a huge uncertainty around that area. And it was a time that you just had to be comfortable with taking the risks and traveling out or being somewhere that you may not be comfortable in, because no one really knew what was happening.
And you said traveling out. So I guess first year out, where did you end up and what was the environment like?
I was actually rural South Australia. So originally I'm from Adelaide. So I was about 4.5 hours away from Adelaide. I would say an incredible experience. I think I worked with some of the best people I ever have in that store, who really shaped me as an optometrist now in how I, communicate with patients, how I practice as an optometrist too. But it was quite daunting because you're in a town that you've never been to. It's very small. There's, not more than 20,000 people there. You're out on your own. There's no one else around. There's not a lot of optometrists within that area too, so even calling upon people is quite difficult. So yeah, I felt like I really had to grow as an optometrist quite early on, as to compared to having more of a support system, but that was just because of the times of what it was. So yeah, really sort of interesting first year of practice, I would say.
And was that in a corporate setting or was that in an independent setting?
That was a corporate setting, yeah.
Okay.
So
Cool.
and it's still really good. I think working rural is always a different experience.
Yeah.
With how the town is, how corporates run, regardless of corporate or independent, to be honest. Yeah, so it is very, very different to what I had ever experienced before, being only doing placement or working within metro areas.
Yeah. And you weren't like 1 hour you were 4.5, 5 hours, you said, out of Adelaide. So, I guess you find those rural settings encompass a little bit more than what a corporate practice would say in the middle of a city somewhere where it's very, very defined out there. It could be, you're looking at a whole array of particular sort of circumstances.
No, we didn't have ophthalmologists that were there all the time. I think they used to come once a week just for one day. And so you really had to train yourself. And I think that's how it shaped myself as a practicing optometrist now, is that I had to be good at many things, because you didn't have somebody just to call up on quick, or a vast range of options for them to go to. And a lot of people, you're thinking 4 or 5 hours away from a main city, people don't want to travel to unless it's really necessary. So that I think really shaped how I practice as an optometrist now, because I do think that it has made me to be who I am now as a optometrist and also practice owner.
And can you speak to what that phase taught you about yourself as a clinician sort of early on?
Yeah, well, I think graduating from uni, you think you know what your strengths are. And then you get into the workforce and you're thinking, oh no, this might actually not be my strength, or, I really need to work on this and everything. And I think that was the biggest reality check at that point, to have a look at how you were as an early graduate optometrist, and then figure out, how do I improve on things, or how do I listen to feedback from other people and take that on to then make sure that I'm, doing the right things or anything like that, whether or not it comes to patients or within the practice or anything. So I feel like that was really important. And that sort of early on feedback, whether it was from colleagues or patients, didn't really matter. You got to sort of take it up on board, because I do think it's super important to actually listen to all of that.
And obviously, in reflection now, and some of the points I think you've illustrated, that rural setting helped you understand the industry a little bit more holistically, as opposed to just being wedged into a corporate practice in a metro setting. At what point did you start to realize that you wanted something more, and what did those next steps look like for you?
Yeah, great question, because it probably wasn't just one moment. I do think it was sort of in and amongst even uni. My business partner and I actually talk about this a little bit, is how we both sort of knew we wanted some sort of ownership and business ownership, but it wasn't really vocalized because it didn't really seem like that was something that was super attainable, of course, when studying, and even sort of graduating from uni, starting work. It didn't really seem like something that it was, sparked the interest. But I think the interest was always there. And it came from one of two things. It came from, as a practitioner, not being able to be the practitioner that I wanted to be, in the way that communication with patients, time with patients, skill sets, equipment, this and that. There were so many branches when it comes to that too. But I also saw it as an opportunity to grow in our industry, because I do think that there are many, many opportunities out there, but it is quite hard when you are secluded to a particular corporate or a particular store and stuff. So that, I thought, really sparked that interest to be like, I definitely am interested doing more, but it's how to get to that stage is always the hardest part.
And when did you feel that first thought? Like, was it the first year? Was it second year? Was there a moment that it sort of clicked, or is it something that's just inherently been within you? Did it come from like a family member, perhaps? Of, have you been in and around, business owners? Where did that stem from?
I actually think it came within the working for the first 6 months. Right. It was definitely the very first 6 months of working that it started off, and I thought, I don't think I could be an optometrist that is doing what I'm doing now for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And not to say that there's plenty of optometrists that do that thrive in that environment, that love it. And I've had conversations with family members too that have said, I love to be the person that is not the owner. That is where I do thrive. That is where I can do my best. But in those first few months, I realized that I'm not that kind of person. And I do need that extra step and that extra challenge. So I would say it was the first 6 months. And it actually just came from conversations, to be honest. It just came from conversations from friends and family members. Yeah. That was probably the biggest realization for me, to be like, we're having this conversation and they're saying they're pretty happy how they are, but I am not. So there's something there that needs to change.
Yeah. What I love about what you said there is, and a bit earlier on, was that you weren't being the practitioner you wanted to be. So you had a realization that you could create what you wanted in a way that you wanted, and you'd also recognized the business opportunity. And I think that really speaks to what our industry presents. You do have the ability to be a healthcare provider and offer a consultative, service where you're a healthcare professional and going on that noble of wanting people to see and to do, to do good in the community. But then there's also a business blend, and the business is where you really get your true success. Well, not true success. It's a form of success, but it's almost a validation of what you're doing is right, and the community wants it and needs it. Yeah. And if you're able to, as an optometrist, identify that early on, and maybe you had or you hadn't, but when I hear you say that, I'm like, well, that's a recipe for success. And it probably speaks to some of the success that you're having now, because you've got those two core ingredients that are required. Yeah. And that's really interesting to see. Now, was the decision to go to a rural setting, was that something that was strategic? Did you know that you were going to get what you were getting when you got there, or was it more, no, that was the opportunity and it just so happened to be something that brought some things to my attention?
Yeah, actually, it was more just about what was available and what opportunities were available at that point. Yeah. There was just not a lot of metro jobs at the point where we graduated, and I do think it's quite similar in this case. So, I try to tell a lot of students, go rural, because you never know how it's going to be, Yeah. And I think it is really important to have those experiences. But it actually came from that. And I think I went into it not expecting anything. No. And what I got out of it was probably just way more crucial, because it did sort of spark more of that interest and gave me a bit more of a push to be where I am now.
And, you've mentioned that it wasn't a part of a strategy. And what I love about these conversations is if there are students or if there are young optometrists that are sort of, going to resonate with your message and your story, it's like, well, maybe, that could be an opportunity you look for and be strategic about it if it's something that you're thinking about, because it might help the journey and we'll come to learn. You mentioned a business partner. You mentioned speaking to somebody at uni about starting a practice or the concept of ownership, the idea of ownership. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I guess, how did that start and how did that, I guess, all eventuate?
Yeah. So my business partner now, her name is Ebru. We obviously went to uni together. We graduated together. We built a really nice friendship when we were at uni as well, and even afterwards. And we used to always sort of FaceTime call because she was based here in Melbourne. I was rural SA before heading back to Adelaide too. And so you would message, you would FaceTime call constantly, check in, see how everything's going and stuff. And both of us just interestingly had that conversation of being like, what would it be like if we had our own practice? And we always say this because it actually kind of started off as a joke. Like, we really sort of were like, we'll just see this, let's see how this is. And then I think we both slept on it for, a few nights. We still kind of were talking about it. And then we actually just sort of took it seriously then. We said, hang on. So we're both actually thinking about this. I think we would make great business partners too, because we both have very similar values and a vision for this as well. So why don't we actually take this a little bit more seriously and sit down properly and, have our first discussion about it? And that is actually how it all started. I think people will feel like, it's a bit strange that it started off as just like a small little jokey conversation, but it is how it started. And I think I say, a joke conversation, but it wasn't a joke to us, because we both took away that this is actually not a joke. This is something that we are truly, truly passionate about. And let's see if we can actually make this work.
Yeah. That's, you mentioned it before that it seemed like, we're just doing it as a joke, and then all of a sudden it evolved, and you've sort of touched on it there. But was there a specific moment when you can say, there's a line, say, on one side of the line is joke and the other side is, well, not a joke? When that actual line was crossed, was there a particular moment? And if it was, what was it that actually made that shift? Was it something that happened externally that made you, go, no, this is the time, let's be serious about this? Can you speak more about how you recognize that moment, I guess, and how you and Ebru came to that particular point, and then what those next steps looked like after that?
Yeah, so one of two things. We both sat down, we wrote down, not sort of a full business plan, but we wrote down ideas, I would say, of everything that we had thought about and for the knowledge that we had at that point too. And both of us actually spoke to our parents. We both actually spoke to our parents, and we said, what, we're kind of thinking about that. And they both said, to parents, I will say, are, 4 of the most supportive people that you'll ever meet. They actually turned around and said, go for it. They really looked at us and said, go for it. And, having that support at that level, knowing that your parents are the ones that are saying, you know what, go for it. You know what, this can actually be something. And actually, I remember showing my dad notes and everything like that. And my dad's got ideas going this and this and this too. That's awesome to see too. Really having other people that are like, oh, you know what, you're thinking that, but what about this? They didn't turn around and say, no, you know what, don't even think about it. Just happily do this and that and everything. And it probably is because they all saw that spark within both of us, that they were also willing to be on board. So external factors, I will give it to the 4 of them as a big thank you. Yeah. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here.
And that early support definitely would have made a big difference to you, obviously, as you've mentioned. But I also imagine there would have been some hesitation, some fears. So can you speak to, I guess, what they were, how you handled them, and did you ever get to a point of talking yourself out of it?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest fears was that we had a lack of business knowledge, because you graduate from uni and you have an optometry degree, you are training to be the best optometrist you can, you're trying to find your interest within the health field, and then you're putting on a completely different hat of saying, okay, maybe I know a thing or two about being an optometrist, but what do I actually know about running a business? Because I had never done it before. This is not anything that I've sort of had 7, 8, 9 businesses previously and then said, let's do this and you can take concepts from that. I'd never actually done anything like it before. So I think that was probably the biggest fear, is walking into the unknown. Because there are plenty of people that study business. There are plenty of people that have been really successful in that way and understand the nitty-gritty ends of how a business runs, whereas we sort of understand optometry really well, but there's a huge space here that we did definitely lack knowledge. And I think that's where the fear came from. Interestingly enough, I don't think there was much of a fear in terms of there's a big corporate domination and how is independent going to thrive or anything like that. Interestingly enough, we didn't actually think of that as much as we thought of how do we learn everything to do with business. Than that side of things. And maybe it's a little bit of a shift in our interests and shift in how the industry is going, with a big push on independent optometry too. That potentially wasn't a fear, even though you would think it would be.
Yeah, well, it's a fear, from what I see. It's a fear that is an initial known fear that people consider, but when you start to actually map it out and peel the layers of the onion, you actually realize it's the complete opposite of fear, and it's actually opportunity. But that's another sort of part of the conversation that we'll get into. Again, was there a point there where you almost convinced yourself not to do it, or were you guys both hell bent on, no, this is going to happen, and there was never ever a doubt that obviously there were fears, but there was never really talk of it. Oh, you know what? Let's just park it. Let's just not do it. Great idea, but don't want to make that jump.
I think you just said it really well, is there's always the fear, but there was never the doubt. And we actually never had any sort of day, week or anything like that we said, let's park it. Let's just sit on it and everything like that. We actually just went, no, we're going to keep working towards it. Yeah. And call us crazy for not saying, let's park it or anything. But I think that's what really pushed us to be like, no, let's actually not give up on this. Because something that we're passionate about. It is something that can work too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's this concept of, I don't know what the term of it is, but you've got your known knowns, obviously things that you know and you know them. You've got your known unknowns, and it feels like the business part of it was unknown to you, but it was a known unknown. And so you were strategic around it. And then obviously you've got your unknown unknowns, which I'm sure you can point to some of those as the journey mapped out.
Few of them.
Absolutely, right. But that's the whole ignorance is bliss kind of concept too, that if you had known about them as a known unknown, would you have done it as a known unknown? And maybe you wouldn't have. So it's everything works out quite well from that point of view, and it sounds like it has for yourself. And Ebru, for that matter. But I guess if we sort of take that next step, you've obviously, found a partner, and I want to speak about partnerships a little bit later on because I think they're integral with regards to new setups. But at the same time, there are generally two ways that you can get into business.
Absolutely.
You can buy something existing, and you can start Greenfield. Both have their positives and negatives.
Absolutely.
How did that look like for you and Ebru going into this with regards to exploring, either existing, and was that ever an option, or was it always about going Greenfield? How did you make that initial decision as to what to do?
So we did research on both. We didn't sort of go into either blindsided. We did huge research on both. We got into contact with independent owners who were looking at selling their practice. We had big conversations with them as well, whilst we were also working on a Greenfields too. So we didn't sort of go down one pathway and stick that pathway the whole entire time. We had them both, and then one was maybe a little bit ahead of one another for actually a good amount of time too. So it was a little bit of a double. I think what the best thing was to have a conversation with existing optometrists and also owners too, because that did also teach us so much in those early days as well. And, for anyone listening, I do think that is really important to have conversations with people. Doesn't matter whatever age bracket, how long they've had a practice for, because everybody has that vast amount of knowledge, no matter what. So we did definitely look at both pathways. We did have a good opportunity to buy into an existing practice too. But ultimately, Ebru and I, and we did have big discussions over this and everything, we also felt that purchasing the existing practice that we were looking at was still not fulfilling what we initially set out to do. Right. And that was what the big deciding factor was in doing our own thing as well. is saying, you know what, independents are still fantastic and they're still doing incredible things. But if we really, truly want to do what we want to do ourselves, the only option is for us to do a Greenfields. And so that actually was the deciding factor. And there are still plenty of incredible independents out there that are wanting to sell their practices, and they find their perfect people to buy into their practices too. And we both thought, you know what, I don't know whether we're the perfect people for this, because we think that our vision just needs to be shone in a different light.
Yeah. And I love the conviction that you sort of deliver that with, because, you went through the processes of both. And I'm going to make an assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in that journey of getting information and doing your research, doing your due diligence, getting out there and talking to people, did you find optometrists were giving in information, and were they open to sharing? And, because I would assume that you think that they're not, but when you start the dialogue, you probably were surprised with how much they're willing to share and how much they're willing to. Was that the case?
Yeah, and I think, you think that they're going to turn around and look at you and say, you're so young, like give it another 10 years or so, and then let's have a conversation then. But we didn't have that. We had people who took us seriously and said, you know what, these people are determined and they're wanting to learn about it. So great. And you're so right, is the more you actually have a conversation with them, they have so much knowledge and they're willing to actually be open about it and have those conversations, because at the end of the day, and hoping for everyone, and I know Ebru and I have the same mindset too, but we're wanting other people to thrive as well, because what is better than having more independents out there with more incredible optometry owners? Sounds like a great world to me too. So yeah.
And I totally agree with that. And I feel like it stems from a deeper understanding with regard, and this is maybe from the optom's point of view, and I think it's highlighted in your actions, to be fair, because you've gone and explored the possibility of buying, but what you've decided to do is then go and start your own, and it speaks to the fact that you wanted to do something different to even an existing independent. And so a real independent actually doesn't see another independent as a competitor, because you know yourself that your process and your experience for your patient is totally different to the independent down the road. So even though you're competing in theory for the same particular person, the person that resonates with you is not going to be the same for every practice. So you're trying to find your tribe. And I think that's the power of real independence, where, and most good optoms, and I mean, most optoms, whether they're good or not is another question, but will understand that, run the business, will know that they are confident with what they offer. And you can do whatever you want, and it's not going to affect me because I'm doing my own thing. And I think, again, an assumption that I'm making here, in your ambitions, you then decided, I'm going to start a Greenfield because the service you wanted to provide was different to what you saw from the existing independent anyway. And I think that speaks to why some are forthgiving, and they probably see a little bit of themselves in yourself too. If you're speaking to a real independent that's, entrepreneurial in nature and sees the challenge you're about to tackle, and they want to give you guidance. And so I think that's a great realization from that point of view. And I guess if you look back at it, have there been any trade-offs with regards to the way that you picked it? Do you sit back and go, I would have been better if I did that, or I would have been better if I did this, or have you further consolidated that you made the right call?
I think we definitely, you're always going to go through the mindset of, maybe we should have done this, or maybe we should have done that. I think that's normal for everyone in many aspects of life too. But ultimately, I do think we definitely made the right decision, because we really truly have built this up from the ground up and from the initial vision there was. And now the best part is you just keep going on that vision. And it's so much fun to do that as well, because you get to see, 3-4 years ago, what were we like then? What are we like now? And what do we want to be as well? Or what do we want to include in the practice or whatnot? I think all those things make it so that you are on the journey of success too. And that's sort of the main thing that we're really sort of wanting to do as well, is as young business owners, and I guess in the world of optometry, there are probably not a lot of people who are young and in ownership. There is a different mindset. There is a different vision. There is a completely different lifestyle that we have had growing up too, that then shapes what we are also doing within practice.
Yeah. And I'm fortunate enough to see it from the outside perspective, where we deal with multiple practices at all levels of the spectrum of independence. The average owner and where they're at, I feel like there is, corporates for the last 10 years have really dominated the
Yeah.
landscape for where a lot of students go. And
Yeah,
so invariably, a lot of them will get absorbed up into that ecosystem. And once you go into that, and I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, it just is what it is. You know,
absolutely.
they morph into whatever the corporate, you know, juggernaut is that they're involved with, the processes, the routines, and that's all good and well. But where's that younger generation push coming from? And
Yeah.
obviously, the likes of yourself will determine things like that, because you will be able to create your own environment in a way that you want to, and you almost set the tone for the next wave of independence. And so it's a really sort of powerful thing that you're doing, whether you realize that or not, is something different, but it's super inspiring from that point of view. But starting from scratch, and again, I love the conviction in the fact that you had so much confidence to do that. And from the outside, it seems like you're very successful in everything that you're doing, from, you know, I guess the media attention and the different levels of, you know, I guess engagements that you have, and learning about it from the outside. But what surprised you going to the beginning of starting from zero? And I guess we're going to unpack what that looked like from, you know, starting at zero. But in reflection from the outset, what was the one thing that surprised you or Ebru with the journey of starting from scratch?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest surprises, and this is such a positive surprise too, is when we actually opened our doors, we did not realize the love that we were going to get from the community. And, we did, get our name out there. We tried to do as much marketing and all that kind of stuff. It's super important. And that's not something that we're slowed down on now that we've been open for a little bit of time. But I think one of the biggest surprises, and this is going to be more of a positive surprise, is the love that we got from the community. And willingness to actually try something new, and to, give us a shot, give us a chance, and say, you know what, let's actually see how they are. And a lot of those people are still our patients now. We get to wave down the street, or some of them have had kids now, or anything like that,
Wow.
So it was such a positive surprise.
Yeah.
I think what also is that when you are determined, when you do have all your cards in line, and when I say all your cards in line, you've done the hard work to prove it to people that you are serious about it, people are willing to give you a go. And that's not to say we didn't get rejection. We got plenty of rejection too.
Yeah.
And I think if you talk to any business owner, no matter what industry you're in, will also experience this too. But rejection is part of it, but it's also such a learning journey too, because you can take something from it and then actually work on that to then get yourself to that next stage too. So I think that was also a great surprise to see people were supportive.
Yeah. And you would have learned more from those rejections, I imagine, in any case, than what you would have in being successful too. So they're a really important part of the journey. And that resilience factor is obviously critical within independence, because you've got to carry a lot of that. When you're down, that people look to the leaders with regards to picking them up and taking them to the next level. And obviously that's you in your business. If we can get into the bit of the nitty gritty with regards to how the startups, you decided to go Greenfield from zero. If we start to break down then, how did you decide on is it Greenvale, the suburb that you're based in?
Greenvale,
So how did you decide on Greenvale as the location of the practice? What did that look like? And what was the research that was involved with, picking certain areas? And what did you look into, I guess from that point of view in those early days?
So my business partner is from this area, and she has spent majority of her life within this area too. Okay. We did sort of have a look at what state is going to be the best to even open this up to. So it wasn't just, we've definitely got to be in Melbourne and we've got to do this. We did actually do a good amount of research about, is there any opportunities in South Australia? Is there any opportunities in New South Wales? Like, we did actually look everywhere. And we may not be as familiar with some of those areas too, but I think it is crucial and important in those early days to not box yourself in, and to look externally and see what else is there. But ultimately we decided, no, we do want to be in Melbourne. I think the opportunities and the growth perspective was quite great of what we were looking at. And it is really nice to just have that little bit of upper hand, because you have someone that does know about the area a little bit better. And so that's when the sort of scouting started. And we, and I would say we, but it was actually a lot of my business partner, Ebru, that was doing most of that scouting, because I was at this point. And she was the one that was actually going around and having a look and saying, you know what, this area has so much growth, but there's no one here. There is no one that is actually giving them the healthcare and the eye healthcare that they require. They're all needing to travel for it. And that was where that interest sparked in the area too. There's a lot of new homes coming up, a lot of young families into the area, huge growth factors. So there was definitely a big research factor. And I do think it is really important when you are looking at location and location scouting, because you can't really go in blind, because you don't really want to be in a situation where you're in an area but potentially there's no growth there, or there's already sort of 7, 8, 10 stores that are supplying that area too.
That's right. Yeah.
So research is super important. And this is, we're just talking about location as research, but there are so many different aspects of research within the first years of opening that you do need to look at. So yeah, it sort of came from her knowing the area and doing the research to know that this was the right area for us.
Yeah, you mentioned that there wasn't any optoms already there, and I think that's a pretty critical one. I mean, other than making the decision of starting an independent practice, I think the second biggest decision is where it's going to be. It dictates a lot more of what else will proceed. And so you mentioned no optoms already in the area from what you understood. What other signs were you looking for in an area, or what other things were you looking for, I guess, from a mindful point of view of it having to have? Was there like a set size population? Was there anything specific that you guys were looking at too that helped you make the decision?
So Ebru and I have quite a large interest in pediatrics, and that's what we do a lot of. And so I think the knowledge of knowing that there were young families within this area, there is still a lot of older generation that is still within this area too, but majority of them do have quite a lot of grandkids too. And so we did know about all of this, and we sort of looked at it and said, well, we do want to do a little bit more to do with pediatrics than, say, a lot of other practices there. So we did also look at that as an option for us too. And location being, yes, getting the suburb, but location of being on a strip mall versus a shopping centre versus a home, that is also part of location scouting too.
Absolutely.
And so that was a huge thing that we did. There's no sort of strip malls around this area because it's quite suburban. There is a shopping centre. There's only one shopping centre. That's where we are.
Yeah.
We did also look at all of that too, because yes, we can build it up in our home if it's something that is being done within that area or so, but this is still quite a new area, so not a lot of people are doing that. And I do think in our business, with having retail as such a large aspect as a shopping centre makes sense, because foot traffic is quite important. So that was also a big part of it too.
And it's interesting there because most independent practices won't locate in a shopping centre. They'll generally be, say, on the street outside or on the street of the shopping centre. I mean, some will be in homes and more of a residential kind of sort of surrounding.
Yeah.
So I guess the decision to go into a shopping centre, that was obviously a strategic one. Was that something that you were adamant about from the outset and you wanted to? Were you always drawn to that and then justifying it? Or did you not want to and then realise, hold on, based on what we're seeing here, this actually is the best decision for us?
We were drawn to it mainly because we had sort of settled on the idea of being in Greenvale. And then once you've done your research and saying what's actually going to work, a shopping centre is going to work in this area. So that's why we were really sort of drawn to it. It may have been a little bit different if we were in a different area that does have, strip malls and all that kind of stuff. Very much could have been a different situation, but I don't think we had that because there's not that in this suburban area yet, I will say. Because who knows what's going to happen?
No. And I appreciate that you brought up that level of detail with regards to location because, I was sort of more thinking suburb, but, you've mentioned that within the location, there are locations within the location too and what type of. And so to make that distinction, I think is really critical and something that, younger students and younger optoms that are thinking about starting a business probably need to consider from that point of view. That wraps up part 1 of my conversation with Alisha. We explored Alisha's journey from rural optometry into independent ownership, the challenges of building a practice from scratch, and the early decisions that shaped the foundation of iOptical. In part 2, we shift focus towards what happened after opening the doors, including building the team culture, developing a strong pediatric focus, and creating patient-first experiences that continue to drive the growth of the practice. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in part 2. Thanks for listening to The Focused View. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe on your preferred podcast app, and share it with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals across Australia. For additional resources and downloads, visit thefocusedview.com.au. I'm Michael Nasser. Until next time, keep focused.